At my engagement party, my parents caused a public embarrassment. My dad looked at my ring and said loudly, "It's fake. You really think he could afford a $10,000 diamond?" I laughed bitterly. Check the certificate in my purse. But before anyone could move, my fiancé grabbed the mic and shared his side. I've always known my parents had high expectations. I grew up in a small town where success meant more than just being happy or comfortable, it was about status. My dad, especially, made sure to emphasize how important it was to keep up appearances. He wasn't the kind of man to show emotion easily, and he always acted as if the world was watching. My mom, on the other hand, was more quiet and passive. She had learned to just go along with things. But I knew from an early age that the way they lived their lives wasn't how I wanted mine to look. I didn't care about social circles or fancy titles, but my parents did. When I met Jake in college, everything changed. He was different from anyone I'd ever known. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, and he wasn't interested in climbing some corporate ladder for the sake of appearances. He was kind, stable, and genuinely loved me for who I was. In a way, I was relieved to find someone who understood that love didn't need to come with a price tag. But my parents didn't share that view. Jake wasn't good enough in their eyes. He didn't have a fancy job title or a family name with a reputation behind it. He was just Jake, a software developer who worked hard and cared about the simple things. And honestly, that was all I needed. When Jake proposed to me, I didn't expect fireworks or grand gestures, but I did expect it to be a moment for us. The engagement ring he chose for me was beautiful. It was a 1.5-carat diamond, well within the budget we had talked about. Jake had worked hard to save for it, and I loved the thought he put into picking something that was both stunning and meaningful. We decided to host an engagement party, hoping to bring our friends and family together to celebrate. It was a modest affair at a nice venue, nothing too extravagant, but I could feel the anxiety creeping in when it came to inviting my parents. I wasn't sure if they'd even come. They weren't exactly supportive of our relationship, and I knew they weren't thrilled with Jake's lack of ambition. Still, I invited them. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment they'd see how happy he made me, how much we had built together. My dad wasn't one for socializing, so I didn't expect him to mingle much, but I hoped he would at least try to hide his disapproval for one night. Everything started out fine. The venue was beautiful, and guests were congratulating us left and right. There was a lot of laughter, food, and excitement. People were admiring my ring, and I could feel the warmth of their support. But deep down, I knew my dad would find a way to ruin it. And, of course, he did. I remember standing near the bar, chatting with a few of my friends, when I saw my dad walk into the room. His presence was always commanding, like he didn't need to say anything to make people uncomfortable. He didn't even acknowledge Jake or me when he walked in, he just scanned the room with that look on his face, the one he used when he thought someone wasn't measuring up. I saw him eye the ring on my finger from across the room, and immediately, my stomach dropped. I knew something was coming. Jake was talking to some of our friends, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. My dad approached us, his eyes now fixed on Jake. He didn't even say hello first. "That's the ring you bought her?" he asked, loud enough for a few people nearby to hear. His voice carried, and I could feel the room go quiet as people turned their heads toward us. Jake gave him a confused look but managed to smile and say, "Yes, sir. It's the one." My dad didn't smile back. Instead, he eyed the diamond again and said in a voice that echoed in the suddenly silent room, "You really think he could afford a $10,000 diamond? Come on. It's fake, isn't it?" The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. I felt my chest tighten, my hands shaking. The laughter from earlier had evaporated. All eyes were now on us. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how ridiculous he was, but instead, I just laughed bitterly. "It's real, Dad. You can check the certificate in my purse," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I knew it was shaking. My dad, without a word, grabbed my purse off the chair next to me and rifled through it. He pulled out the small certificate I kept in the side pocket and waved it around. The look on his face was a mixture of disbelief and disdain. The awkward silence stretched on. I could see Jake tensing up beside me, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there, waiting. And then, before I could say another word, Jake grabbed the microphone from the nearby stage where the DJ had been playing. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I watched him walk toward the center of the room. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I know this might be uncomfortable for some of you, but I'd like to say something." The entire room went completely still. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what he was going to say, but I could tell it was important. "I didn't come here to prove myself to anyone," Jake continued, looking directly at my father, though his words were meant for everyone. "I love this woman with all my heart, and I want to spend my life with her. This ring is a symbol of that commitment. It's not about how much it costs or whether you think I can afford it. It's about what it means to us." He paused, and I saw him glance at me before continuing, his voice strong and clear. "I've worked hard for everything I have. I didn't take shortcuts, and I didn't expect anyone's approval. But if you have a problem with me or the choices I've made, I don't need to justify myself to you. This is my life, and I'm choosing her, no matter what anyone thinks." The room was eerily quiet for a moment. My dad, who had been so sure of himself moments earlier, now looked completely out of place. He didn't know what to say. I could see the tension in his body, the way his fists were clenched at his sides. I stepped forward, taking Jake's hand in mine. "He's right," I said softly, but with conviction. "We don't need your approval, Dad. This is our life, and we're building it together. I don't care if you never understand. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not just to make you happy." Jake squeezed my hand, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet strength. I had never felt more sure of anything in my life. I was standing up for what I wanted, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my parents, tear it down. The silence in the room was palpable. The only sound was the soft hum of the background music from the DJ's speakers, which now felt out of place, distant. I could feel all eyes on us, but I didn't care. For once, I didn't care about what anyone thought. My dad didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there, staring at us with a mix of disbelief and anger. His jaw was tight, and I could see the color rising in his face. It was the same look he'd had when I told him I wasn't going to follow the career path he had planned for me, when I refused to take a job just because it was prestigious. He had never liked the choices I made, but this was different. This was the man I loved, and he wasn't going to back down for anyone. Especially not my father. Finally, my dad's voice broke the silence, though it was quieter this time. "I don't know what kind of world you two are living in, but it's not the real one. You think this is all just a fairy tale?" he spat. His words were sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Jake didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me, but I could tell his body was tense. He was holding on to his calm with everything he had. "I'm not interested in fairy tales," he said, his voice steady, but the force behind it made it clear he wasn't going to back down either. "I'm interested in building a real life with her. And I don't need your permission to do that." I felt a flicker of pride. Jake was stronger than I'd realized. I'd always known he was kind and considerate, but seeing him stand up to my father, without hesitation, made my heart swell. I loved him even more in that moment. I knew he wasn't going to change who he was, or who we were together, just to make my parents happy. And that was everything I needed. My dad, however, wasn't having any of it. He shook his head in frustration, his fists tightening again. "I don't care how hard you've worked, Jake. There's more to life than just working for what you want. It's about knowing your place. Knowing who you are in the world." I took a deep breath, finally speaking again, my voice more composed than I expected. "I know exactly who I am, Dad. And for the first time in my life, I'm not going to let you tell me otherwise." It was like the air in the room shifted. The tension was thick, but there was a strange sense of finality in the air. I'd said what I needed to say, and I wasn't looking for my dad's approval anymore. There was nothing he could say that would change the way I felt about Jake or my decision. For a moment, I thought my dad might say something else. Maybe he'd explode, yell, or accuse me of betraying him. But instead, he just stared at me. The anger slowly faded from his face, replaced with something I couldn't quite place. It was almost like defeat. The reality was sinking in. His daughter was no longer the little girl who would bend to his will. Finally, my dad spoke, but it wasn't with the fire I had expected. It was quieter, almost like he was trying to process everything. "I don't agree with this," he muttered. "But I suppose there's nothing more to say." I didn't reply immediately. I just stood there, the mic still in Jake's hand, my hand still in his, feeling more secure in my own choices than I ever had. My dad wasn't going to change overnight, and I wasn't expecting an apology. But there was something about the way he said that last sentence, almost like a resignation, that told me we had reached some kind of turning point. For better or worse, I had finally stood my ground. Jake stepped away from the mic, and we stood there for a moment, the two of us facing my father, the weight of the moment settling in. People began to murmur again, as if the storm had passed, but the atmosphere was still thick with unease. I could hear whispers, some supportive, others critical, but I didn't pay attention. My focus was entirely on Jake and the way he held my hand like it was the most important thing in the world. "I'm sorry about that," Jake said quietly, turning to me. His eyes were filled with concern, though he was still calm, his composure unwavering. "I didn't mean to make things worse. I didn't want him to make you feel small." I squeezed his hand tighter. "You didn't make anything worse. You made it better." I've been letting my dad's words control me for too long. I don't want that anymore. Not now, not ever. Jake nodded, his gaze softening. "You don't have to apologize for him. He's your father, but you don't owe him anything when it comes to your happiness." "I know," I whispered, the weight of his words sinking in. And for the first time I realized how true they were. My whole life, I had been trying to win my father's approval, trying to fit into the box he'd created for me. But that wasn't who I was anymore, and it wasn't who I wanted to be. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The energy had shifted, and while people tried to continue celebrating, it was clear that the mood had been altered. I could still see the whispers and the glances as people talked about what had happened, but I didn't care. The storm had passed, and I was left standing beside Jake, my partner, my equal, ready to face whatever came next. My mom did approach me later in the night. She was quieter than usual, her expression unsure. She didn't apologize, but she did try to make small talk, asking me about the wedding plans and how things were going with Jake. I answered her, but I knew the conversation was just a way to patch things over. There was no real connection anymore, not between us. She wasn't the kind of person to challenge my dad, and I wasn't sure if she ever would. But I could feel a slight shift in her demeanor, a softening that hadn't been there before. Maybe she was finally starting to understand. As the party came to a close, I felt exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. I had said what needed to be said, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a beginning. I was no longer the person I was before. I had stood up for myself, and for the first time I knew I didn't need anyone's approval to make my own choices. Jake and I left the venue hand in hand, the night's event still weighing on me. I didn't know what the future held, but I did know one thing: I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they were, tear us down. We were going to be okay. The night was long, but not for the reasons I expected. As we left the venue, Jake and I found a quiet corner outside, away from the chaos of the party. I felt drained, emotionally, more than anything. Everything that had happened with my dad still replayed in my mind. But Jake, as always, was my anchor. "I don't want you to think about it anymore," he said, pulling me into a hug. "We did what we needed to do. You stood up for yourself." I rested my head against his chest. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of everything still hanging in the air. It wasn't just my dad. It was years of resentment, of silent disapproval, and the constant pressure to meet some ideal I wasn't sure I could ever reach. And in the back of my mind, there was this nagging voice that told me the night wasn't over. Jake sensed my hesitation. What's going on? You're still thinking about it, aren't you? I pulled back slightly, looking up at him. I don't know. I just feel like we didn't finish it. I'm not sure if he's ever going to stop trying to control me. I don't know if he'll ever accept you. Jake's expression softened. Hey, one thing at a time. We can't control how other people act. But we can control how we respond. I knew he was right, but it was hard to shake the years of emotional manipulation. In the back of my mind, I thought about the long road ahead. I wasn't ready to completely let go of the idea that I might never get the approval I craved from my father. I wasn't sure how to live without that constant looming expectation. We walked back to the car in silence. The night felt cooler now, and I could feel a sense of finality in the air. The party had ended, but it felt like the beginning of something new. For better or worse, my relationship with my parents had changed forever. The following week passed slowly, but the weight of the situation still lingered. My mom had reached out a few times, trying to smooth things over. She called to check on me and asked if I was okay after the engagement party. She even mentioned that my dad regretted the way things went down but didn't apologize. It felt like an empty gesture, but I didn't mind. I had learned to take what I could from her. Jake and I talked frequently, but I could sense he was a little worried. Not about our relationship, he was solid in his commitment to me, but about my relationship with my parents. He didn't want me to feel like I had to choose between him and them. But then, something unexpected happened. I got a call from my dad one afternoon. The phone rang while I was sitting on the couch, flipping through some wedding magazines. I didn't recognize the number, but when I saw it was from my hometown, I figured it was probably him. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? Hi, it's your dad, his voice came through, flat and reluctant. I know we didn't leave things in the best way the other night. I paused, unsure of what to say. I wasn't ready to just forgive him, but part of me wanted to know where this conversation was going. What do you want, Dad? I just want to talk, he said, the words slowly coming out, like he wasn't quite sure how to put them together. Look, I know I've been hard on you. I've been thinking about what happened at your engagement party, and I realize I made a fool of myself. I nearly dropped my phone. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My dad, admitting he was wrong? It wasn't something I ever expected to hear. Not from him. I wasn't trying to hurt you or Jake, he continued, his voice softer now. I guess I'm still having a hard time with the way things have changed. But I can see now that it's your life to live, not mine. I took a deep breath, processing what he had just said. I appreciate you saying that. But I'm not going to pretend everything's fine. It's been a long time coming, Dad. I've been trying to live up to your expectations for years, but I can't keep doing that anymore. I need you to accept me for who I am, not for who you want me to be. I get it, he said quietly. I'm sorry I've made things so hard on you. You're an adult now. You don't need me to tell you how to live your life. It was the apology I never thought I'd hear. It wasn't perfect, but it was the closest thing to an admission of his mistakes that I'd ever gotten from him. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I think I'm ready to have a relationship with you on my terms, I said, my voice steady. But that means no more judgment. No more expectations that don't belong to me. I understand, he replied. I'll try my best to respect that. And, I'd like to meet Jake sometime. If that's okay with you. The conversation ended with a tentative understanding, and as I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was a step forward. It was enough for now. A few days later, my dad surprised me by showing up at our apartment. He'd never been the type to show up unannounced, so I knew this was a big deal. He looked nervous, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, but there was a certain vulnerability about him I hadn't seen before. "Jake, I know we've had our differences," he started, his voice awkward but sincere. "But I want you to know that I'm trying. I've been an idiot, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'd like to get to know you better. If you're willing." Jake was quiet for a moment, looking at me first. I could see he was hesitant, rightfully so, but then he stood up, extended his hand, and said, "I'd like that too, sir." The awkwardness between them was palpable, but there was a shift. A chance for reconciliation. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. My dad wasn't suddenly going to become the father I'd always hoped for, and Jake wasn't going to magically win his approval in an instant. But something had changed. It was small, but it was enough for now. Later that week, I got a call from my mom, who told me she was proud of me for standing up to my dad. I didn't expect it, but it was nice to hear. She said she hadn't realized how much pressure I had been under all these years, and she wanted me to know that she was proud of the woman I'd become. It wasn't the fairy tale moment I had dreamed of, but it was something far more real: progress. I wasn't sure where my relationship with my parents would go from here, but for the first time I felt like I had the power to choose. My parents would never fully accept Jake the way I wanted them to, but I didn't need them to anymore. What mattered was that I had found someone who loved me for who I truly was, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for me when the world seemed ready to tear me down. And in that moment, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't in proving anyone wrong or in making them pay. It was in simply living my life, on my own terms, with Jake by my side. That was the victory I had been waiting for all along.